So in this video, we're going to go over the differences between living in Midtown West versus Midtown East and vice versa. Both of them are Midtown. However, they're very, very different from each other. So you've probably spent a lot of time in Midtown West specifically. So if you're not living in New York City right now, but you have been here at some point in your life, you've probably spent time in Midtown West and didn't even know it. So the theater district and Times Square is in Midtown West. So that takes up a decent portion of Midtown West. Midtown East is where Grand Central is, where the Chrysler building is. There's definitely not as many iconic things in Midtown East as there is in Midtown West, and therefore it makes the neighborhoods very, very different from each other. So like I said, Times Square in the theater district is part of Midtown West, and that makes it a very fun neighborhood to live in because there's a lot going on. However, when you live in New York City, you're not spending time in Times Square because it's typically a place that tourists come into when they're just seeing New York City for the first time. And I'm not one of those New Yorkers who absolutely hates Times Square because I think that tourism is so important for New York City as a whole. I'm also a big believer that everyone is a tourist somewhere. I'm not a tourist in New York City. However, if I go to any other city in the world, I'm technically a tourist. So I think that there's a lot of New Yorkers that like hate tourists, but at the same time, it's like you have to be grateful for them because it really helps our economy here. I don't hate tourists. I don't hate Times Square. However, I don't spend time in Times Square. And I also lived in Midtown West specifically and would try to avoid Times Square as much as possible, even when I lived in Midtown West. There's a lot of people there because even if you're not going through Times Square, a lot of the people who are coming into the city to see Times Square and the theater district as a whole will trickle out to the other parts of the neighborhood. So you're just gonna get a lot more foot traffic than you most likely are in Midtown East. So in Midtown East, it definitely is more residential than I would say Midtown West, but there are also office buildings there. So on the weekdays during the day, you will get foot traffic from people going in and out of office buildings there. However, that's also the case in Midtown West too, because there's a lot of people who do work in Midtown West as well. So in Midtown West, you have the tourists and the people working, while Midtown East, you might get a few tourists, but you're really just getting the people who are there for work or they live there. I would say that Midtown West is just way more chaotic than Midtown East is. So if you're looking for a more homey, quiet vibe, go to Midtown East over Midtown West. So Midtown West was actually my first neighborhood that I lived in Manhattan specifically. So I lived all the way on 12th Avenue. I mean, all the way on 12th Avenue, like literally on the waterfront on 42nd Street, actually. I should put that in there, on 42nd Street. So if familiar with New York City, you know what that means living on 42nd Street. 42nd Street is the busiest street in all of New York City. I think that that's an actual fact. It's definitely by far the most traffic going in and out of 42nd Street. It's probably the most famous street, I would say, besides Broadway, I guess. So yes, I lived on 12th Avenue, 42nd Street. It wasn't as chaotic as you probably would think because I was all the way up to the waterfront, and I could also escape on the waterfront if I wanted some peace from like the rest of the city. But it was definitely the most chaotic neighborhood that I've lived in compared to the other neighborhoods I've lived in throughout Manhattan. If you're looking for more of a neighborhood quiet feel, Midtown East is definitely gonna be a better option than Midtown West. However, I also think that if you're one of those people who wants more of a neighborhood quiet feel, I don't think that either of them are really great options for you. There are gonna be some smaller neighborhoods in Midtown East that I would recommend, like some streets that would probably be better than others. However, I do think that there are other neighborhoods in New York City that might be even better for you if that's what you're looking for. So in the end, they're both Midtown, but they're very different, and I do think that there's pros and cons of each. Now, Midtown West, I would say probably overall has better dining than Midtown East does. There's definitely just more dining establishments in Midtown West as a whole, but I do think I would be more likely to go out dining in Midtown West than I would be in Midtown East unless I was going somewhere specific or a friend's gathering or something like that in Midtown East. There definitely going to be our pros and cons to both neighborhoods. However, it's really a personal decision where you decide to live. There are a lot of people who I know who live in Midtown West, and even though it is chaotic and there's a lot going on there, they have no problem with it and they love their building, and that makes it worth it. So there's a lot of people in Midtown East who feel the same way about their neighborhood as well. Like I always say, where you decide to live in Manhattan is a personal decision. So the only person who can really figure out what's best for you is you. So the best way to figure out if you would like living in one neighborhood over the other is just spending as much time as you can in each of those neighborhoods. So if you guys have any comments to make about Midtown West versus Midtown East, let me know what you guys think because I would love to get your thoughts on each individual neighborhood.